Let's dive into a very interesting pro-revenge Reddit story. Landscaping owner rips my friend off of $400, so my friend makes him incur $15,000 in expenses. Word of note, this is not me, but posting up here for a friend who currently resides overseas. Long story, but worth the read. A while back, my friend was selling some stuff online, and among the items was a water heater. You know, the ones you see in every community hall, church kitchen. It was in working condition. He threw it up online for $150 and got an email from a person who runs a landscaping business saying he'll give him $100 cash today. Done. 2 weeks later, he got an email saying that it's not working. Weird. So my friend offered to give a full refund or cover repair cost if it's under $100. The guy instead sent an invoice for $400 saying the repair's been done, and if my friend doesn't pay it in 48 hours, he'll send a debt collector after him. He paid it, out of fear, and emailed him the confirmation. The landscaping owner then emailed back saying, "This is the price you sometimes have to pay when selling secondhand electronics," followed by a "Have a great day, don't let this hold you back," with the at the end of the email. A month later, my friend was in a bar and he overhears a girl talking about how her boss, who runs a landscaping firm, screwed over some dumb selling a water heater. My friend said, "Oh damn, I gotta hear this. Do you mind if I join your table?" And the girl said sure and told the story. Her boss had brought a busted water heater from a secondhand store for $25 and a working one for $100. And billed the seller for the repair for the busted one before he sold it on for $300 to some community group. My friend asked, "Who did this so I don't hire that guy to fix up my yard?" Ha 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 ha's all around. She says the company name and, lo and behold, it's on the email of the guy my friend sold the water heater to. He was the dumbass in the story. He told me he was pretty angry about it, but COVID then hit, so he had other stuff to worry about. 18 months later, he was browsing the website he originally sold the water heater on, and he saw a bunch of landscaping materials. Shovels, gardening stuff, wheelbarrows, lights for working at night, drills, nail guns, some construction materials, and a generator. Now, in my friend's location, apparently, if you're selling a generator, then you need to have a warrant of fitness for it, proving that it works, it's safe, no flayed wires, etc., etc. Most people ignore it, and he saw that this generator is being sold by the landscaping firm. This generator, he said, just by looking at it, there was no way in hell would it have a WAF. Word of note, failure for a business to provide a WAF upon request for a generator. After 2 weeks, when reported to the official departments and enforced by the court, the punishment is a hefty fine, and the courts often force the seller to refund the affected party and pay any costs that they incurred. Evilplottingmusic.mp3. He talked to his flatmate who agreed that they would go 50-50 on the generator, but he would transfer the money. Now, my friend had never met the landscaping firm owner face-to-face when selling the water heater. He left it outside, and pickup was confirmed via his security camera, and when he gets there, it was clear that the owner, this old, grumpy-looking man who enjoyed yelling at his employees, had emptied out his storage unit. The owner was very much, as it is, no refund, and the flatmate showed him the transfer confirmation and they take the generator for $800. No warrant of finesse is provided. They then took it to a friend of theirs who is an electrician, and he agreed to check it and give an invoice for repairs, and to quote the friend, "It would be cheaper to buy a new generator, and to be honest, this generator shouldn't have been sold. It should have been scrapped." They also found that the main identifier number had been scratched off, but not a second number that is often recorded as well on WEFs for tracking purposes. So they got in contact with the seller telling him the cost for repair, around $5,000. He promptly tells them that he's not paying as it is, no refund, to which they then asked, "Have you got the warrant of finesses for this generator?" Silence for 2 days. They followed up with another email asking for it. No response. They then ask again and get an email from him saying that he'll take it back for $800. They said no, we want the WOF, and they get no response. They emailed him every day for 2 weeks. Nothing. So they printed out the original item listing that had been screenshotted and had been archived on the website and reported him to the website, and then the government. 4 months later, my friend is in court and the guy went up to him. He tells him that he will take back the generator for $800 and that my friend and his flatmate will be going in to tell the judge that the seller has refunded them and that they want it all dropped, and that's what's happening here. Full stop, end of story. They are doing what they are told to do. My friend said no. So they went into the courtroom and it's over very quickly. The inspector the government sent out to inspect the generator stated that it was in poor condition, shouldn't have been sold, was highly unsafe, and that the seller had tried to get the generator a WOF in early 2021, but instead had been told that it was to be repaired or scrapped, and that it was not to be sold. They identified it by a second number on the generator that they took down in the original attempt to get it WOFed, which had not been scratched out like the first. The judge ordered the landscaping firm owner to refund the flatmate the $800, pay the $5,000 for repairs to the generator, and was ordered to pay a $10,000 fine, which would be given directly to my friend's flatmate as the affected party. When they left the courtroom, the owner was furious and told them that under no uncertain terms was he paying them a penny more and that he couldn't understand what he had done to deserve such treatment. To which my friend said, "Remember the water heater?" He gave him a very confused look. "Remember the water heater you brought for $100? Well, I do, because I sold it to you, and I know that you had a different one repaired and invoiced me for it." His jaw was on the floor, and to hit it home he said, "Isn't it? When what goes around comes around, especially when it accumulated interest. You have 48 hours to pay, or a debt collector will be contacted. Remember, this is the price you sometimes have to pay when selling secondhand electronics. Have a great day. Don't let this hold you back." And they left. He paid the $15,000 2 days later. My friend and the flatmate split the $10,000 50-50 as they agreed. Combination of rent payments and study stuff. The generator they got repaired, and then got a WOF for it before selling it for $1,000 with a newly replaced identifier number. They then went out for a wonderful dinner and night out in town. In short, old landscaping owner rips my friend off $400, so my friend makes him incur $15,000 in expenses. Here are some top comments on the post. The first one is from 24111. What's the consumer protection law like where that is even? This just sound weird. Asking the seller to pay even more than original sale prices for a damaged item sounds like something that only makes sense in a business contract setting. And the reason being solely because it is contracted as such. And from my limited understanding of tort law in general, you can't just bill the repair cost as damages and have to prove that the repair was a reasonable decision to avoid further financial damages, i.e. cost of not being able to do business. Knowingly selling a defective product is illegal in a different sense altogether, but those fines don't usually end up in the consumer pocket. Big_Sugi replies to 24111. In the US, UK too, I think, the measure of damages for a breach of contract is the benefit of the bargain. You're supposed to get the economic value required to put you in the same position you'd have been in if the contract had been fulfilled and not breached. Here, with the generator sold as is and with all warranties disclaimed by someone not in the business of selling generators, there'd be no claim. But even if it came from a dealer promising a working generator, the measure of damages would be the difference between the value of what was received, effectively zero since it's not working, and the value of what was promised, maybe $1,000. Repair costs might be a portion of the damage, but only if they were reasonable. So if it was an emergency, and the buyer had to shell out $5,000 in repairs, or else they'd lose $100,000 in stock after discovering that the generator was a dud, that money might be recoverable. But here, where they spent $5,000 to repair a generator worth $1,000 just for the hell of it, that money would not be recoverable. Damages would be $1,000 plus any incidental or consequential damages and any applicable statutory penalties, e.g. a generator dealer might be facing treble damages pursuant to a Deceptive Trade Practices Act. Add it all up, and I can believe there might be special requirements attached to the sale of a generator. And I can believe there might be statutory penalties available to enhance damages. And I can even believe that the friend managed to overhear this story in a pub. But I'd need to be convinced that the law somewhere doesn't just permit, but requires a plaintiff to commit thousands of dollars of economic waste in the pursuit of a warranty claim. It was a very clever revenge. The landscaping owner scammed OP for $400 over a water heater. OP waited until he spotted the landscaping owner's unsafe generator for sale. He knew the generator needed a warrant of fitness, but the owner didn't have it. Despite this, OP and his flatmate bought it. After buying it, they reported the owner for selling the generator without a warrant of fitness. As a result, the court fined the landscaping owner $15,000. It was very satisfying seeing landscaping owner paying $15,000. Let's now jump on to another story from Pavoger. We had a member of staff, M, try to force himself onto another staff member, F. She chose not to press charges. That didn't sit right with me. To preface, I live in a country that employs a large foreign expat workforce in pretty much every industry and in all levels. For someone to move here for work, they have to be sponsored by a company or the individual that's employing them. I own and operate a small restaurant business here and employ more than a handful of foreigners as servers, cleaners, kitchen staff, drivers, etc. So here's the story. I was lounging on my couch enjoying the last of my weekend one day when I get a call from telling me that one of our sponsored employees, a server, let's call her Janice, was picked up for indecent exposure essentially. Long story short, she was caught hooking up with a guy in a private booth at a local restaurant. Basically, the police walked in on them whilst engaged in some seriously heavy petting. They were fully clothed, but the guy she was with, or practically on top of, I should say, has his junk out. Turns out he works at the restaurant 2 doors down from where she worked. After a bit of chastising and threatening to escalate the situation and have them deported to sufficiently scare their senses back into them, they let them go, but not before signing a pledge-type document promising to never repeat the offense, or else. A slap on the wrist, basically, and everyone got to go home. But it doesn't end there. That night, something clicked in my brain, and I had the thought, how and why did the police find them in a private booth in the back of a restaurant before the restaurant's own staff did? So I called the restaurant the next day. I thought maybe they called the police on them immediately for some reason. Or maybe the couple got belligerent when staff asked him to stop. Turns out the staff didn't notice a thing. In fact, up until that day, the police have never been to that restaurant before. And when they did, they simply walked in, went straight to the back booths where the two were sat and busted right in. I realized this meant that someone must have seen them and called the cops on them, point blank. The question was who? I decided to speak to Janice. I wanted to speak to her anyway that day, both to check in and get her version of the situation. I also gave her the employer, "You know you did something stupid," chat and reassure her that she's keeping her job. I also wanted to ask her who she thought called her in, and without hesitation, she said it had to be Sammy, who was one of our drivers. "Why do you think it was Sammy?" I asked. "He's the one that dropped me off at the restaurant that day. He might have seen my friend walk in right after me and called the police on us," she said. I knew the part of him dropping her off was true, that literally his job and her only free mode of transport. Well, that sounds a bit drastic. Why would he do that even if he had seen you do anything? I asked. She claimed it was because he was jealous. He was really into her apparently and kept trying to get her into bed, she said. What genuinely pissed me off was when she told me that he actually tried to force himself on her once and she fought him off, and that he hasn't tried or even said anything since, other than be very short and curt with her. My immediate response was, why on earth would you not tell me or one of your managers right away? She said she had dealt with it her way, and it stopped. Plus, she didn't want anybody to get fired on her account, and she didn't want any interaction with the authorities, so she decided not to make a big deal out of it in the first place. She also declined to press formal charges against him, which I advised her to do. Her declining infuriated me even more. This guy was going to get off scot-free. Now, clearly I was about to fire Sammy, but in my mind that wasn't enough. For someone to attempt to rape a person basically and not get in trouble for it? Not okay with me. But it seemed like it was something I had to live with. Obviously, my next conversation of the day was with Sammy. My intent was to confront him with the accusations. I called him into my office. I didn't really know where to start, so I went with, "Obviously, you've heard about what happened to Janice this weekend." He stepped in it right away. "Heard about it?" came the unexpectedly proud response from a proud AF and positively beaming Sammy. I called it in. And this is where it started to get super satisfying. You see, for a couple of years since I met Sammy, every now and then, he would pull out and show us all pictures of his wife, who was back home living with his mother. She was younger than him and quite beautiful but sadly barren, which is apparently why she settled with an older fart like him. He was so proud of how pretty she was. He was also a devout religious man, or so he claimed. So I asked, and why call the police? He came back with, "After I dropped her off, I waited to see who she was meeting because she's a troublemaker woman. When I saw the man walk in after her, I call police because I know him. And he is married, and this is against the laws of God and man." I'm smiling now. I knew I got him. Why do that instead of calling your direct manager or even me, and before even seeing for yourself what they were doing exactly at that? Why make it my problem and the company's problem what she does in her own time? Silence, head down counting his shoes. "Sammy, I know why. I know what you did. Janice just told me. I'm disgusted by you and sorry that we hired you." He had the audacity to mumble, "I only tried once, sir." I almost slapped him. Anyways, I fired him, handed him a one-way ticket home, which was in 4 hours, and told him to GTFO. This is where I get my not-so-petty revenge. I had his house phone number saved somewhere from "We hired him." It was on his CV. I knew that because I called him there to interview him before we first hired him. I waited until his flight took off and dialed the number. I assumed either his mother or wife would answer the call, but I was wishing for the latter. I got my wish. "Hello, Mrs. Sammy, I'm your husband's employer." Well, his former employer anyway. "Just so you know, I fired him a few hours ago and he's on a flight home as we speak. His flight number is XXXXX. He will be arriving at XX:XX. Just so you are aware, I was forced to fire him because he attempted to rape a fellow employee half his age. I'm sorry," I said, and promptly hung up, but not before hearing her gasping in shock. It was very satisfying to see Sammy getting beaten up by karma. He tried to force himself on Janice, and he failed. He tried to defame her. As revenge, the restaurant owner spoiled her marriage and messed up Sammy's reputation. The next story is from SC2 Superjack, Mock the Disabled. Justice is served many years later. This is a story about a piece of shit receiving their deserved karma several years later. Many years ago, I worked in the lovely career of retail. It's sadly normal for there to be a constant flow of shop scum that make you despise their existence. And there are those that are so horrific that what they do is burned into your mind forever. Fortunately, one of these unforgettable moments allowed me to extract my revenge. I had only worked in retail for 1 year in this newly built store and was starting to settle in. Getting to know the great customers and understanding that some people shouldn't be allowed outside, which being a shy person who hates conflict wasn't the best, but at least one of my customers was an absolutely adorable elderly lady who always made time to talk and was an absolute joy to be with. It had been some weeks since I had last seen her, but one morning, I see her car park into the disabled parking bay, as she already has a blue badge. Only this time, she hobbled out of the car on crutches with a pot on her leg. I didn't have chance to talk to her yet when a works truck, which did not have a blue disabled badge, pulled into the disabled space next to her and out jumped an early 40s builder with their teenage kid. Well, this little old lady was having none of this and must have absolutely massive balls of steel, and stood up to this ignorant builder and politely informed them that they shouldn't be parking there, as it's for the disabled, and he doesn't have a badge. What happened next I can't forget. This builder decided the best course of action was to humiliate and insult this poor elderly lady in crutches, accuse her of faking her disability, and claim the cast on her leg was a fake, and that she probably milks the benefit system for as much money as possible, then walks off putting on an overdramatic fake limp, laughing away with their teenage kid whilst the old lady stood there in shock. Sadly, being one who lacks courage, I did absolutely nothing about it, and that would stick with me forever. I tried feebly to ask a manager later to do something about it, but they didn't care or want to get involved. For years, I worked in this store always seeing this scum builder come in and out. Fortunately, I never interacted with this scum builder, but I saw them often, and every time I did, I would always remember what they had done vividly. I would still see them park in the disabled bays, and even got to the point where I would recognize them by the large blue Mercedes they drove. 7 years later, I was still working in this store, and this scum was still parking in disabled and looking like an absolute cunt. Yet this year, I was blessed with good fortune, and our store was outfitted with some absolute, joyful equipment. Due to the high number of complaints, our store had set up a company to deal with the parking violations, but instead of having external parties coming in and ticketing cars, the staff of the store were given the ticketing machine, and it was our duty to go to the car park and record any cars that violated the parking rules. This was all done digitally, and there would be no paper tickets upon the cars. This was brilliant. As soon as I found out, I knew what I was going to do. It didn't take long for me to learn how to use the machine, and it certainly didn't take long for the opportunity to get revenge, and so it began. There were 3 rules for parking, and if you break these rules, there's a lovely $80 fine in return each time it happened. The first rule, no parking in disabled without a badge, and I know well that the scum builder is certainly violating this rule, and it wasn't long until I saw him next, and as soon as he entered the store, I quickly scurried out with the ticketing machine, and lo and behold, there was the oversized blue Mercedes in the closest disabled bay, with no badge. I smashed them car details in with some well-shot photos and sent the report off so that they would receive a lovely letter of their fine they would ask to pay. That's not enough though, but fortunately it takes weeks for them to finally receive the ticket, which grants me the opportunity to constantly ticket their parking violations. Because as you would expect, the scum would always park in disabled, and as I worked at the front of the store, I would always know when they had parked. After ticketing their car dozens of times, the scum unfortunately learnt their lesson as their oversized blue Mercedes no longer appeared in disabled parking bays. But as you expect, the scum would still be scum, and they would find their new parking space inside child parking. Rule 2, don't park inside child parking without a child. Had this scum gotten enough, I thought? Of course not. They haven't learnt their lesson and continue to be a complete wanker and park in the child parking, which we didn't have many spaces for. At this point, I knew all their car details by heart and would gleefully fill out the ticket machine as I skipped over to their car violating the child parking and take the photos needed for them, including shots of their cat seats that bear no child seats in them. And as it became routine, this once again carried on a few weeks more of tickets being created, and eventually they start receiving the fines. Fortunately, me being me, I am completely invisible to others and often looked over, and I have yet to be seen or caught. But as all good things must eventually come to an end, when the scum came into the shop, their blue turd automobile was no longer there in child parking or disabled. Has the scum finally learnt their lesson? Would you be surprised if they had not? As it didn't take me long to find them. Rule 3, you must park inside a marked bay. And what a surprise, the scum still manages to f this up. They would park over the line, taking 2 spaces up. Well, guess what? That's a job for me and my ticket machine. Trying to park inside taxi parking but can't fit the big car in it? Boom, that aren't inside a marked bay, and ka-ching, another ticket and fine for the have one single wheel slightly over the white line of a bay? Well, guess who technically broke the rule? That's right, Scumbag did. And there goes a few more weeks of fun, until eventually Scumbag runs out of ways that they can possibly break the rules, and our company hires externally to start ticketing cars. So my beloved weapon of justice goes to rest. Now I know what people are probably going to say, that all these fines are not enforceable because of blah blah blah, but I honestly don't care for a few reasons. Firstly, I'm being paid to do this, so either way, my time or money isn't wasted. Secondly, it did have an effect as they repeatable change their parking habits. And thirdly, even if they don't end up paying, they are still going to spend a buck-ton of the time and effort trying to overturn them over and over again, having to constantly be harassed by mail. Overall, if all the fines are counted separate and added up, they would have received thousands of pounds worth of fines, building up overtime for being scum. Cherry on the top, about 3 years later, I walk by this piece of scum on the car park and watch as they scream at some innocent dude in a high-vis jacket, accusing them for being the one giving them all parking fines. Which put me at peace knowing this must have seriously got to them and cost them to still be raving mad after 3 years. Short version. I give someone many small parking fines adding up to the thousands of $10 for insulting a disabled lady several years earlier. Here are some top comments on the post. The first one is from Glorificus42. I worked at a supermarket for several years to support myself through uni, largely on the cigarette lottery complaints desk. The store was next to my old high school where I was relentlessly bullied, including a physical assault that ended up with me basically needing a new knee. I quit school that summer and managed to negotiate a place through clearing at the local uni based on grades I'd already achieved. My role at the store made me guardian of the cigarette scratch cards and vodka miniatures on Friday nights, the entire opening hours of Saturdays, and the entire opening hours of Sundays. This meant refusing sale of these items to every single one of my former bullies based on their requested ID being clearly fake, or, sorry, I can't sell alcohol to you as you're clearly already drunk, or, sorry, I can't sell you skins without you also buying rolling tobacco, but I can't sell you that as you can't prove your age. Naturally, they initially protested loudly that we were in the same year at school, and I knew they were over 18, but if they had any complaints, they were already talking to the complaints chick. It was a crap town in the mid-90s and they didn't have many other options, so they'd shuffle off, their weekend plans at least somewhat ruined. For the 5 YRs I worked there. Very petty, very childish. But 25 YRs on, I can look at my surgery-scarred leg and remember those golden moments rather than remembering getting my kicked simply for being a girl who liked girls in a backwards hellhole of inbred shellsuit-clad chavs. The next comment is from Faustus C. Nothing good comes of mocking the disabled. My poor dog has arthritis in his left rear leg. He now walks much slower and with a limp. I still love him dearly, but jokingly call him Cripple Cow because he's black, white, and limpy. Lo and behold, I got sick and developed nerve damage. My left leg is bad and I have a pronounced limp. Will for the rest of my life. He and I limp the same way. I have since assumed the moniker of Dirty Cripple to atone for my gentle mockery of my dog. The irony has not been lost on me. Zonel replies to Faustus C. I have my own limp to live with, and my sincere advice to you is to find a new gait. Just limping will strain your other foot and increase your odds of injuring it, and it'll certainly experience pain and tiredness faster. I spent years limping, making my good foot harder and harder to walk on until I was using a crutch under one arm. Then one day, I took a step and felt no pain, and I spent a week relearning how to walk in such a way that the bad foot doesn't hurt like it did, to the point where you'll only notice I favor it if you're really looking. And now I can spend hours on my feet before I'm reduced to full-on limping. OP took relentless revenge on the builder who mocked the handicapped by issuing him dozens of parking violation tickets totaling thousands of dollars.